I actually, when I read this first paragraph, my first stepping back thought was, this could not have been written by anybody else. This could be written by one person. And to the extent that that is possible with your essay, you're doing very well.
Hi, Ben. Really excited to talk to you about the Wharton essay. Let's dive in for the University of Pennsylvania MBA program. Would love for you first to start by introducing yourself.
Awesome. Nice to meet everybody. My name is Ben. I went to Stanford in 2019, graduated in 21, originally from Queens, New York. Did McKinsey, Mayor's Office of Chicago after graduating WashU. Went and got the MBA, and now I'm running a chess coaching company and do a ton of stuff here with Leland.
Awesome. Ben is one of the best essay experts on Leland, I would argue, in all of the United States. So excited to talk to you about this essay and deconstruct it. Let's pull up the essay. This essay, the University of Pennsylvania, the Wharton School, has two primary essay prompts, and they're kind of infamously known as the why Wharton, what will Wharton do for you, and what will you do for Wharton. So they're kind of bilateral in the way that they're approaching you, your MBA program, and the goals that you're trying to get out of the school. This one is the what do you hope to gain professionally from the Wharton MBA? So what will Wharton do for you? Ben, I would love to just dive in and go paragraph by paragraph. We'll kind of dissect it, say what's good, what's bad, and then we'll end with some kind of higher level notes about the essay as a whole.
Sounds perfect.
Let's start with this first one. So this guy is starting, he's introducing himself. He wants to be a supply chain. He wants to start a supply chain company that uses technology to innovate packaging and shipping logistics in a sustainable manner. At a high level, what does this paragraph do well?
Yeah. So I think a number of things. First is, I think it's worth getting this out of the way. I actually, when I read this first paragraph, my first stepping back thought was, this could not have been written by anybody else. This could be written by one person. And to the extent that that is possible with your essay, you're doing very well. And notice that nothing he included here is like completely otherworldly. He didn't do anything insane. This is just like someone with a focus. And I think that first sentence is tantamount to that focus, which is, I want to start a company that uses tech to innovate packaging and shipping logistics sustainably. That's a fantastically straightforward sentence that I would also call a sentence that is orienting. The rest of the essay, I'd be very surprised if it didn't have to do with the shipping company and it didn't have to do with sustainability. In service of the rest of the essay, you do well in your writing by just getting clear up front. And I know for a fact that this person, I have a strong suspicion that this person spent quite a bit of time figuring out what that focus was, thought about it a lot. And the only way you arrive at such a clear sentence, even if it's not the most beautifully written sentence, is with that focus beforehand. So this is a person who's very deliberate, and you get that from the first sentence.
I love that. I think it's also a good reminder. I think a lot of people kind of assume you have to solve cancer or you have to be like on a fast track to CEO of a Fortune 500 company to get into a school like this. But it's not. It's more about self-awareness and knowing what your specific goals are, because that's kind of a good indicator that you're going to get out of an MBA program what you want, is because you're going in with a very clear idea, specifically for something like Wharton that asks you very upfront, what are you trying to get out of this program? I think that's a great kind of high level what this does well. Let's move into maybe some ways that we could make this first paragraph stronger.
Yeah, I think there's still probably a little bit of a fluff in here that maybe it's not like full on fluff with just kind of waxing poetic about generic things in the sustainability space, but saying a sentence like the industry is ripe for disruption and giving companies like Flexport success using technology to improve operations. I'm confident there's room for a company of my own. Probably didn't need that. You could say something like, as Flexport has already demonstrated in industry, I will use technology to innovate the industry, but also packaging. I think there's a lot of wordiness in here. And I think that ultimately this candidate, while being very focused, says the same thing once or twice. And I think that middle part of the paragraph is where I see that the most. So when you're writing, I think the most important thing to remember is that the best key on the keyboard is the delete key. And you can always cut things down. I've been tasked with cutting things from 3,000 words to 500 words, or from 500 words to 100 words. And I think the notion that like your language has been like it's Sermon on the Mount, it's enshrined somehow, is a tendency when you're writing that you should do everything in your power to get rid of. So anytime you put something on a page, you should look at it with 0% attachment to the extent that you can.
Yeah.
So I think that's an important way to kind of reduce out the fluff. But I did get the sense that this was a little repetitive and maybe just a little bit wordy.
Yeah, something you've said in past Leland events that I really like is you are so limited with words that every sentence in your essay needs to solve a very specific purpose. If someone were to ask you why this particular sentence, you have to have a logical and powerful reason for that. I think the other thing is it's important to be objective in your accomplishments in the way that you're picturing yourself, and you can have amazing accomplishments, but there's subjective ways and objective ways to portray them. And saying something like the industry is ripe for disruption, and given companies like Flexport success, I am confident there is room for a company of my own. That is your opinion. It is much, much less stronger than things that you could say. And the other thing is you're not pitching Wharton as a venture firm to invest in you, right? You're outlining your goals. So I totally agree with you on that. Any other?
Yeah, that's a good point. No, but that's a good point, Amelia. And I actually think it's in part, it's a little bit different than some of the stuff I was saying too, because when it comes to like the exaggeration piece, or maybe not like the exaggeration of anything that's already happened, but like you putting yourself out there as this like as this star careening through the universe here. Like I think like the end. Just remember that in your essay, like the end product here does not have to be like you start a company or you become a CEO or you do insert dramatic thing here. You don't have to do that. I think in this case, given this person's experience, maybe there's a case to be made. And I haven't seen this person's resume and can't pair it all up, but given the fluency with which he talks about this topic and the precision with which he describes the ideas and the things that he wants to see be a little bit different than they are today, I get the sense that actually maybe this is something that he could do long term. But when you are using this kind of language, like I am confident that there's room for a company, maybe, right? Like that the industry could look completely different by the time you're done with your MBA. So saying these types of things, I don't think it necessarily does anything for you. I think the issue with this kind of language, though, is a lot of people feel like they have to write this way in order to be a good MBA candidate. They almost have to like pound the table for themselves. Don't worry. You got recommenders for that. That's all good. Staying level and staying measured and accurate about your experience, communicating that measuredness, I think goes a long way. And readers read that because they read a lot of this kind of language, and it's nice when it's not there.
I totally agree. Okay, so fairly strong paragraph. The things it does well is it sets off on the right start. It's orienting the reader. It's kind of outlining the goal of the rest of the essay. Those things are really good. It's a little bit fluffy. It doesn't maybe show that you are writing to the audience that you should be necessarily, and there's some subjectivity that we would maybe remove. Moving on into the next paragraph.
Yeah, Amelia, would just say though that like a lot of this stuff, maybe the critiques here, I would say they were a little bit more around the edges, less so the main sculpture. Like I think in general, like good, strong, clear opening would be my summary. All right, let's dig into paragraph 2 here. I think this is a good example, and maybe this was also partly something that made its way into his like. Maybe if he was applying to GSB, like into a what matters most essay or into a why GSB as well, it could have been either way, in either place. But I like in general when people take that one sentence to give me like, where did this passion come from? Where did this motivation come from? Why are you doing this? Why are you making the choices that you're making? I think one component of being deliberate is being able to sit there, focus, dissect, and communicate your future intentions and your ambitions and what you want to see for the world. But I think another form of that is looking back and being like, okay, like let me do the analytical work here and derive like why did I actually make the choices I made? Why did I make the moves that I made? And who were the people or what were the things that got me there? So I think doing that in a sentence, even within an essay that's why Wharton or like what are you going to do here? Like I find it valuable. I find that reflection a helpful, also an orienter. But I think the best thing that's going on in this paragraph, which when you reach back for the past, you reach to your previous experiences in an essay that is why this school or what will you contribute or where you want to go after school and talk about your ambitions and how the Wharton MBA will help you get there. Like it is really helpful to see that this person is looking back at all of their experiences and saying, okay, because I have done this experience, here's what I think I can actually do in the future. Because I have taken XYZ years and put it into even something like, which I would say is a relatively traditional background like banking, how does that previous experience fit into the vision? And the way it fits into the vision is he learned how to manage finance, manufacturing partnerships, things like that from, let's say, his mom's entrepreneurial firm. And I think like he clearly is going to learn some like modeling skills, the ability to forecast, project. What he's doing here is he's building the arrows or the mental map between how does his experience actually contribute to his future vision. Those lines, those arrows are really, really valuable for admissions. It shows that you've looked back, you were, even if you weren't deliberate about every choice you made, you can see the value in every choice that you've made vis-a-vis the thing you want to do in the future. So maybe I made the error of saying the same thing once or twice there, but I think that's the gist.
No, I think that's great. I have a couple of follow-up questions. Let's say, I think this is a really common worry that we see from applicants. Let's say my background is kind of all over the place, and I didn't use the same rationale to make each decision at every step in my life. So I did consulting, and then I went to a FANG company, and now I want to go into venture capital post business school. There's not really a clear, as I would see it, I did this for this reason, and then I did this for the same reason, and then I'm going to do this for the same reason. So how can I, if my background is very varied, start to connect those dots?
Yeah. Um, I think first, just be honest with yourself. I actually think, in my essay I'm bringing in another essay, but I think it's just to illustrate the principle. In my own essay to GSB, I believe in my first or second sentence, I wrote the phrase, and I was really skeptical that graduate school was the next right step. That's in the essay applying to graduate school. But it was a communication about the thought process that I was going through and the honesty of that thought process as I'm not actually certain about the future. I don't know everything. In stark contrast to this essay, actually, in many respects, I don't know how all the puzzle pieces fit together right now, and I don't necessarily know how they're going to fit together in the future. But to the extent that you can try and do that, that's valuable. Amelia, remind me your original question. I want to make sure I'm exactly answering it, though.
How can you kind of connect the dots of
Sure.
experiences that seem very unconnected into a narrative that would make sense to the admissions committee?
Yeah, sure. I think of this process kind of like you go to the optometrist and you get like one or two, three or four. You see a bunch of different lenses, and sometimes the vision's super blurry, and you go through 11 options, and then randomly one is like starkly clearer than the rest. And for example, I can speak to my own experiences in the sense that like when I look back at a lot of the things I've done, workforce development, some coaching stuff, things one-on-one sports, like there's an element of like labor marketplaces that maybe not obvious at first, but I care a lot about, like, for example, the similarity of helping formerly incarcerated people return to the real world and gain employment with how do I help someone move up and take the next step in their career. There's a linkage there, which is person goes from point A to point B, and I enjoy helping people do that. To the extent that you can do that and connect the dots of your experience by looking at it through multiple lenses, that's helpful. Who were the role models in those experiences? What were all of the things that you gained interpersonally, emotionally, from a maturity perspective, professional perspective? What new industries or areas did you get exposure to? Because there's obvious superficial linkages between things. Industry, function. Like, okay, you do 5 projects. They all have to do with climate change. Kind of an obvious linkage. And I liken that characteristic similarity to something like color. It's obvious, right? This is blue. This is purple. They're different in that respect. We can talk about that one dimension, but that's probably not the most relevant dimension, and probably the case. Taste is the thing I would say is most similar about these experiences that I'm having. So similarly, look back at your career and think, what are the other ways that these experiences can relate? What are the skills I got from them? What are the people that I met, or who are the people that I met? And what are the things that I actually did that materially changed as a result? Because your linkage could be everything from a population that you worked with to the specific structure of a deal type that you had if you're in like banking private equity world. So that's my thought there.
Oh, I love that. On the surface level, things can seem very disconnected, but if you spend time thinking about it, if you look at it in different ways, there's a lot of times something that is consistent across the different experiences that you can pull out. That's great. One thing that I wanted to get your thoughts on with this section in particular is nothing that he says is particularly unique, but he goes into a lot of depth and detail. Does he go into a little bit too much? For example, I saw the line, At bank, I was an analyst in the X group where I learned financial analysis, modeling, and business valuation, covered X company as a possible investment opportunity. Do we need to get that granular into like, this is what I learned at specific skills? And of course, this is subjective, but at what point, how do you kind of gauge the amount of detail that you need to include about certain experiences?
Yeah. Um, I would say one good guardrail to put in place is don't go further than your reader will understand, even if you understand. So to the engineers out there, like nobody cares about the inner workings of the SQL code. That's fine. Just talk about like when in doubt, like talk about the problems that you solved, the impact that you had, the people that you worked with, the skills you acquired. Not I figured out how to like level up my Python specifically in XYZ ways, but I became adept at Python is probably a useful thing to take away. So there is a right and wrong level of granularity. I would say when it becomes lost in translation is a great place to stop going deeper.
Yeah,
Um,
I think that's something where like an expert like yourself can play an important role. Is sometimes it you lose track of what really is understandable by the general populace and what will be powerful to an admissions committee. And sometimes all you need is that third person perspective to say, hey, this is maybe how I would frame it. And it's still very powerful, but maybe not as in the weeds as you might do it if you were to do it yourself.
yeah, I would say, Amelia, like a lot of those like levels questions around like how deep to go or how personal to be or how much to talk about this or how to quantify this. How do I come across this way versus that way? I get those questions a lot in the coaching world. And I think it's like probably what like the cogs that are going on in my head is like a combination of like having seen thousands of essays and which ones are effective and which ones are not. But I will say that you're right that those are the nature of those questions. I would say comes up a lot, and it is kind of like a sense check style thing.
Yeah. I think in this specific example too, and correct me if you disagree, but I think because it's serving, the details that he did choose to include are kind of generally serving the kind of indication of the route that he wants to take, and it's serving as kind of a social proof that I will get to where I say I want to go because I've developed these specific skills in my past experience. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I would say let's even go back to the example that you chose, because if you just scan it, like I was an analyst in name group where I learned like modeling, valuation, etc. And that company, which is currently like not on the actual essay, that company like has an innovative win leasing model that I can see in the next sentence. So I think what is being communicated here is that he understands how to value, how to think about investment opportunities in this space, and he's been the way I like to think about now, even when I talk to people, is less like what's the exact thing you want to do with your life. It's like, what are the spaces you want to mess around in? Where do you want to like tinker? And I think this person is showing you throughout this paragraph that he's been tinkering in this space of like sustainable like packaging, shipping, logistics, the whole nine. And he's been doing that since his banking days. And he's showing you within this paragraph how many lenses he has into this industry. And his argument implicitly is like the accumulation of my lenses makes me particularly valuable at solving these kinds of problems, and therefore why I'm particularly suited to go to Wharton to work on solving these problems through your curriculum and extracurriculars, etc.
That's great. I think the one last question I have on this particular paragraph is he brings in work experiences with his family. I know
Mm-hmm.
sometimes there's a little bit of a gray line there, especially when you have letters of recommendation. You can't really ask your mom, for example, whose company she worked at. Is it a red flag to say you worked at a family enterprise in any way?
I don't think it's a flag. Personally, let's put it out there. I know there's a lot of conversations in the world around like nepotism and blah. We're not talking about that per se. But there are these like lingering like this like residue of like, oh, it's like you're working at your parents' business. Like, what does that say about you? I think what this person does really well is just like communicate the value and the skills that he acquired, and doesn't brag about it. Doesn't say that this is like like he's incredible and like blah. Like this is just like, this is what I did. This was his life. And I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And frankly, you travel across the country and the world, frankly, like a lot of small family businesses. And it's probably the one of the most common types of businesses. So I think as long as you speak about it the right way and don't don't make it feel all about family, but make it feel about the things that you learned and the problems and the impact that you had in that work. All fair game.
Yeah, I love that. Want to double down on show the impact that you made at that place. Then the focus becomes on, wow, this you did that instead of the place itself.
I think also like the reason those things are good things to talk about in general, like the problems you solved, the impact you had, the people that you helped, the quantifiable things in the world that were one way and then you made them a different way, is because like to the extent possible, even in an essay that's a personal statement, these are like objective things. Like these are things that like maybe you could be looked up, or like things that like should someone ask you further follow-up questions in an interview, you'd be happy to and easily able to go into detail about them.
Yeah.
So I think that's why like I typically have people, it's kind of why I typically have people like when in doubt, default back to that stuff, try to get out of the hyper subjective things that you could be writing about. If your whole application is just things that happened inside your mind or like were very personal one-on-one experiences, an admissions committee is going to be kind of like unable to be like even verify that anything that you've ever done has ever existed because you're the only source of truth. So if there's multiple sources of truth possible, it's probably has a little bit more credibility to it.
That's great. I love that point. Okay, moving on to the third and last paragraph. So in this, he's kind of bringing it home back to the founder, CEO of a sustainable supply chain company. High level thoughts of what they did well here.
Yeah, in the same way that this person went back and like tied each experience that they have had, the skills they acquired, to where they're going next. I think they're deliberately designing this paragraph to go, okay, I've done my research, I've done my homework down to specific professors and specific companies that have gone through this program, et cetera. These are the areas where I'm taking inspiration. These are the types of things I'm going to get involved in. Here's this type of stuff I want to potentially lead, expand and contribute to. This is his final like weave of the shoelace to answer the question of like, yeah, this is why Wharton. This is what you're going to contribute. This is what you're going to give to the community. And to that extent, I think it's very strong. I think there's a couple things I would probably, and maybe you're going to get to this, like a couple things I would probably say, like not necessarily essential are like the first sentence. Like, I don't think the case method is unique to Wharton. In fact, HBS is like the most popular one. So like, that's a bit of a sentence I would just throw away. Like, I hope to attend Wharton because of its case method learning, which gives students exposure to diverse professional perspectives. It's literally impossible to go to an MBA program in the modern world and not get diverse professional perspectives. So saying that you're going to get them uniquely at Wharton, and again, these essays are uniquely, why this school, why us? It's kind of like going on a date with somebody and saying like, oh, I want somebody I'm attracted to. Or like, I want to have somebody who can think clearly. It's like, yeah, those are kind of baseline qualifications. That's part of this. That's part of this process, right? The stuff that they want to see in this essay is like, what makes you different in how you see this opportunity and how you're going to leverage it. They don't want to know that you're going to just go like they assume that you're going to go through the case method. How could you avoid it? So emphasizing it in your app is not necessary. And I think it's just an important point because I've been editing essays this week even that like some just nail this, just absolutely nail this. Every single resource that they cite is explicitly and clearly and reasonably tied to their experiences and their vision. And to the extent that you drift from that, you probably should like lean into that delete key, because I would get rid of this whole first sentence and start the paragraph.
Yeah.
So just my thoughts.
That's great. I think there's two things in particular that I want to double down on that you just said. The first one is these need to be hyper specific, and you hinted at this in the difference between saying a specific class and saying a case study method. It has to be specific to that school. What makes Wharton different than every other M7, than every other MBA program out there? And then the second thing is it needs to tie in a really clear, logical, and I love the word that you used, reasonable way into your specific path. Like you can say, oh, I'd be interested, take that example that we had before of consulting to FANG to venture capital. You could say, oh, I'd be interested in a leadership class or whatever. But why? That doesn't make sense with your specific background. So that's something, if you leave gaps in your application, the AdCom is going to fill it with something that may or may not be true. So it's important to be explicit and reasonable and logical. I want to get your thoughts on, so in this, he mentions like 3 different classes that he wants to take. I think a lot of times people will mention one class or maybe a professor. For me, this came out as a little bit overkill when there are so many other things that Wharton is known for, and classes are honestly a pretty small part of the overall MBA application and MBA experience. So what do you think? What do you think about his kind of after that first couple of sentences, going into just listing the classes and professors he would take.
Yeah, and so I will say that I don't mind it in this case, and I read essays, by the way, with a little bit more of a, for even though I like, if I was working with this person, like we're talking, I would dig into every single preposition. That's the level of like, I think, precision that goes into some of the editing stuff if I was trying to help somebody. But I would say also like works for me. I view it in a generally forgiving light, and he gives me a specific reason why he's talking about that class. Now, if I'm a 25 years removed admissions reader and I'm looking at this with a maximally cynical eye, I would say like he probably found a similar course at all of the schools that does something similar to this. But to the extent that he gets down to the granularity of like hope to learn about evolving like patterns and strategies adopted by firms sourcing, manufacturing, distributing products, managing designs, if that's what the ops strategy practicum is about, sure, sounds like it, then you know what? You've met the bar. Like I would look at this and be like, yeah, I'm sure you found the ops strategy practicum equivalent at several schools and talked about it in your essay. And then to you, I say like, I tip my hat, sir. It's probably what the admissions committee will do. But like, is it essential? No. Like you said, I would rather learn about a leadership opportunity you're going to take as opposed to a class you're going to take. I'd rather know about something that you want to contribute to for 2 years, 10 hours a week, as opposed to one class you take 1 quarter. So if we're talking about the difference that you'll make on campus, like if you had to choose between one or the other, I would go with something that you want to build or you want to contribute to, as opposed to something you're just going to take. But again, because it's tied, I'm cool with it. Like I think it's good. I think the VC one comes across as a lot more generic, and like you didn't like in this. Actually, it's great that it's next to it, because I think the ops strategy practicum one, like I'm totally good with. The VC finance innovation one, like okay, like that's just a generic finance class, and like there's been nothing in here about him wanting to do VC. There's been nothing in him about like being particularly interested in the innovation of finance or the financing of innovation, just as a generic topic. If this was, let's say, like VC logistics, or like the logistics industry in venture capital, then I would say that this is like applicable enough to his specific narrative, because it's down to a level of granularity which he has taken us. Amelia, I also wanted to mention like one other thing before I lost the thought, because I think it's helpful for people. When we're talking about like how specific to go, and you mentioned something around like how do you like what's the bar of like meeting why this school, in terms of like how specific should you get about a school's resources, let's say. I don't mind the ops strategy practical one, because it just ties back to its vision. If he told me that on page 743 of the VC and Finance of Innovation textbook, it says XYZ, and that's really interesting, I'd be like, okay, like I see that you've gone to an extreme level of granularity and done an extreme level of research, but that extremity offers no value because you haven't tied it back to you and your vision. If he maybe double clicked into something in the ops strategy practicum and spoke to like, oh, maybe there's like a 6-week immersive workshop that they do with a logistics business that, I don't know, maybe is somehow connected to work that he's done before. Cool. That would be going deeper usefully. The sentence and the information is useful and ties back to him. So in that case, I think it's good. But yeah, I think it's nice to see those two examples right next to each other, because one I would say is good and one I would say is canned.
I think that's great. I think there's maybe another way to frame it, and that's, if you were the admissions committee reading this essay, I think there's 2 primary things that you're looking for. The first one is, did they do research to the extent that I know that they care about actually going to this program? Or are they just going onto the class site and picking one that seems relevant? So the first thing is, do they care about going to the school? And then I think that's related to the second one, which is, are they going to get out of this program the maximum that they absolutely can? Are they going in prepared? Would I expect them to accomplish what they say they're going to accomplish based on the research that they've done into their own path? Is that accurate? Is that a good way to look at this maybe?
Yeah, I think that's right. I also think like the more I look at this final paragraph, the more I think like the essay actually falls off a little bit for me. Not to the point of like it's no longer like a good solid essay, but to the point of just like, yeah, the last half of that third paragraph is kind of meh. Like, of course, like if you took entrepreneurial marketing, you're going to focus on driving growth, because that's like the purpose of marketing. So, I'm not really sure part of the purpose, but I'm not sure like, gaining customers and driving revenue is somehow unique to anyone who wants to even be involved in business whatsoever. It has to do with anyone doing that kind of work commercially. So again, I find in this case, I find the tie back, the attempt to tie it back to his company or his company idea a little bit surface level, and I'm not fully buying it. So it's not just that you have to tie it back, and you tie it back in a way that it's like, could anybody tie this class entrepreneurial marketing to any business? Probably. And so the tie back doesn't actually have the specificity you might think it does.
Yeah, that's great. And that dovetails really well into, we've talked a lot about some high level thoughts, but just generally, what are some things that this essay generally does really well and not so well? I think the first one that we mentioned is not every sentence is not every sentence adds something to the broader argument, which I think is really important. And then the other thing that I would love your thoughts on is in the last essay we looked at, which was the Stanford GSB one, you see this kind of same format, I think, in a lot of essays where you start out with the future. What do you want to do? And then the next paragraph is going back in time and saying, okay, this is what I learned in my past that's going to help me get to that future. And then that third paragraph, especially in like a why this school one, is here's what I'm doing now and in the short immediate future to reach that long-term future goal. So anything kind of high level, but especially related to that format and the timeline.
Yeah, I think timeline is it's pretty optional. You can do it in a lot of ways. He could have started this essay with growing up. My parents pursued their passion for healthcare and created their own medical practices and blah, and given us the like motivations for his interests and the skills that he has been building, and then talk to me about the vision, and then talk to me about the community aspect or the things he's going to do at Wharton. You could also talk to me at like, you could put it second paragraph first paragraph third paragraph second. I actually think there's a lot of different possible orders for this in terms of the like, if we just look at the full body of information and think about organizing it. But chronology is like generally something with a 400 word essay where I think you can play around a little bit. Mm-hmm. Just try to ask yourself consistently the question, just step outside your essay and go, if I drop the person in at the beginning, are they going to have the bearings by the end of the first paragraph to get the rest of it? Which paragraphs set up the other ones a little bit better? What's the right way to organize the team on the court? So I think to that extent it's good. Other stuff though, you mentioned like just things it did well, things that could have improved. I think the organization of information felt fine for me. I think the things that this essay at a high level, it feels like it's one draft away from being great. I feel like it's a perfect example of an essay that works. I can see this person getting accepted. I don't think it's because of this essay, but I think this essay did slightly raise their chances from whatever a neutral baseline might be. I do think it was a net positive asset to the application. But I don't think this is the type of essay that someone reads and they go, wow, gotta admit him. Just gotta bring him in. And I think the reasoning for that is probably the hollowness of that third paragraph to me at various points. I also felt, like you mentioned, Amelia, I felt like there were still opportunities where we could have gone deeper, and it probably just didn't happen because of the real estate being a little bit repetitive in nature. And I think if I were to go through this essay, I would say you need to clean it up just a little bit, need to tighten it. Here are the sentences I would slice and dice. Here's how I would communicate X, Y, Z in 5 words and not 15 words. And I noticed really, really small things that maybe an admissions reader would pick up on, maybe not, but like everything needs to be perfect if you're submitting these essays, in my opinion. Why would you not? It's completely within your control. But most people probably wouldn't notice that there's a space in front of the word to at the start of the third paragraph. But I noticed that because I can't miss it, because that's how my brain works. And that's how people who read essays all the time, their brain works. They don't miss those details. So when I read that and I see that detail, I go, you know what? They didn't quite dot every I, cross every T, and delete every space. So little stuff like that really matters. This just like, I would give this essay like a solid 7. I would give it a solid 7. This person could totally get in. But if the other parts of the application aren't strong, I could totally see this person not getting in.
I totally agree. It needs a light Ben edit, in other words.
Sure. Probably. That said, Amelia, like some good practices here for sure. I think like if I were working with this person, I would be really encouraged by their focus, by their effort that they generally put in to linking experiences past, present, future. And to that extent, I think this essay very much does the job. And like, I have a good idea why they want to go to Wharton. So they really answer the question.
I agree too. They have a very specific outlook on what they want to do with their life. They have the experiences and skills that they've built and able to get there. And it's maybe a little lacking on how Wharton specifically will help them get there, but the both of those endpoints are pretty solid.
Mhm.
Awesome.
Mhm.
Thank you, Ben, so much for your time today, for looking through this essay. This is going to be extremely helpful. Excited to do more essay deconstructions with you too.